Security dragged the poor maid out of the private hospital suite as her bare feet scraped the marble floor. She kept turning back, whispering his name like a prayer. Inside the room, Kehinde Adeniyi, the billionaire, CEO everyone mocked as foolish, laughed softly, his eyes unfocused, his mind dismissed by doctors and family alike. A woman in an expensive dress leaned toward the nurse and scoffed. "He's rich, not smart. Let him sleep." No one noticed the tremor in Kehinde's hands. No one noticed how the pills on the tray had been changed. Only Hawa Sadia had seen everything. As the door slammed shut, her voice slipped through the gap, low, steady human humming a lullaby from her childhood. For the first time in years, Kehinde fell into a deep, peaceful sleep.
Why could a poor maid do what money, power, and medicine could not? Where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? If you're drawn to emotional African stories about truth, kindness, and justice, don't forget to subscribe.
Lagos woke early as it always did. Before the sun fully lifted itself above the skyline, the city was already alive with movement. Danfo buses coughing smoke, hawkers balancing trays of bread and sachets of water, office workers clutching phones as if time itself might escape them. Wealth and want shared the same roads, separated only by tinted windows and locked gates. At the center of it all stood Adeniyi Group headquarters, a glass and steel tower that reflected the sky by day and glowed like a promise at night. It was one of the most powerful corporations in West Africa. Finance, technology, healthcare, its reach extending far beyond Nigeria. And at its helm sat Kehinde Adeniyi, the man the media loved to mock. They called him the foolish billionaire. Kehinde was known for arriving late to board meetings and early to parties. He forgot names, asked the same questions twice, laughed at the wrong moments. During presentations, he doodled on notepads or stared out the window like a bored child. Once, he signed a document upside down and apologized profusely, blaming a tired head. The internet never let it go. Money without sense. The headlines sneered. What they didn't see was how carefully the act was performed. The pauses were timed. The mistakes were measured. The foolishness was a mask worn daily, tightened every time someone leaned too close to his wealth with greedy eyes. Kehinde had learned early that intelligence attracted predators. Inside the same city, far from the glass tower, Hawa Sadia washed her face with cold water in a shared bathroom at a crowded compound in Surulere. The mirror was cracked, but she could still see enough tired eyes, a thin face that carried years she hadn't lived yet. She tied her scarf neatly, smoothing it down, as if order in small things might protect her from chaos in bigger ones. She shared the single room with Aisha Bello, who was still asleep on the mattress they both paid too much for. "Another long day," Aisha mumbled without opening her eyes. Hawa smiled softly. "Every day is long in Lagos." She stepped outside before the heat settled in, clutching her small bag. Inside it were her cleaning gloves, a folded lunch of plain rice, and her phone, old, cracked, but precious. She checked it quickly. No missed calls from home. That was good and bad at the same time. Back in Katsina, her mother depended on the money Hawa sent each month. Some months it wasn't enough. Most months it barely was. Hawa worked as a contracted cleaner for Adeniyi Group's private hospital wing, a high-security section, reserved for executives and VIP patients. She had been assigned there only 3 months earlier, after another maid quit suddenly. No one explained why. They never did. The hospital wing was quiet compared to the rest of Lagos. Polished floors controlled air voices lowered by money and fear. Hawa learned quickly to be invisible. She cleaned without making noise, eyes down, hands steady. In places like this, being noticed was dangerous. On her first week, she heard the whispers. "That's his floor." Which one? The CEO, the foolish one. They spoke of Kehinde Adeniyi, like he was a problem no one wanted to solve. Doctors complained that he didn't follow instructions. Nurses laughed behind their hands when he asked simple questions twice. Family members visited rarely, and when they did, they stayed only long enough to remind everyone who paid the bills. Hawa saw him for the first time on her third shift. He was sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, swinging his legs like a schoolboy, humming to himself. Papers lay scattered on the table. A nurse stood nearby, her smile tight. "Sir, you already took your medication," she said patiently, as if speaking to a child. "Oh," Kahinda replied, blinking. "Did I?" "Are you sure?" Hawa froze by the door, mop in hand. His voice wasn't weak. It wasn't confused. It was controlled, soft but not broken. The nurse sighed, picked up the tray, and left. As soon as she stepped out, Kahinda's humming stopped. His shoulders straightened. For a brief moment, so brief, Hawa wondered if she imagined it. His eyes sharpened. They met hers. Hawa looked away immediately, heart racing. She focused on the floor, scrubbing harder than necessary. When she dared to glance back, he was swinging his legs again, humming off-key foolishness, restored like a curtain drawn shut. That night, Hawa lay awake long after Aisha fell asleep. The image of those eyes stayed with her, clear, watchful, nothing like the stories. She told herself it was none of her business. At a Dinier Group headquarters, Vanessa Cole Adebayo adjusted her blazer as she stepped out of her car heels, clicking with confidence. She had built a reputation for being seen in the right places with the right people. Wealth attracted wealth, and she knew how to orbit power. Kehinde Adeniyi was the sun she intended to circle. "She's beautiful," someone whispered as she passed. Vanessa smiled. Beauty was a tool, and she wielded it well. Pity, too. She had already practiced the look she would give Kehinde, the gentle smile reserved for men she pretended not to judge. Meanwhile, on the hospital floor, Hawa finished her shift and prepared to leave when a supervisor stopped her. "You, Mrs. Ngozi Okafor," said sharply. "From tomorrow you'll be cleaning this floor full-time. Day and night rotation." Hawa's stomach tightened. "Is there a problem?" Mrs. Ngozi's eyes were cold. "Just do your work. And remember, what you see here is not for your mouth." Hawa nodded. She always did. That evening, as she cleaned the suite again, she heard Kehinde speaking softly, to no one it seemed. "I know you're there," he said, staring at the wall. Hawa paused, heart pounding. "People think silence means emptiness," he continued lightly. "But silence listens." She stood very still, unsure whether he meant her. Then he laughed loud and careless, the foolish sound echoing off the walls. A nurse passed by and rolled her eyes. Hawa resumed cleaning, but her hands trembled. For the first time since coming to Lagos, she felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. Not hope exactly, but awareness. A sense that beneath the city's noise and cruelty, something else was unfolding. Something dangerous, something that had nothing to do with her and everything. By the end of her first full week on the private hospital floor, Hawa Sadia had learned one important rule: silence protected her better than honesty ever could. The other cleaners avoided her now. They whispered when she passed, their eyes sliding away as if association alone might bring trouble. Hawa understood. Floors like this swallowed people. Assignments changed overnight. Contracts ended without explanation. A person could vanish from the schedule and never be mentioned again. Still, she came every day. She arrived before sunrise, left long after the city lights flickered on, and kept her head low. But it was impossible not to notice how differently people behaved when Kehinde Adeniyi was involved. Doctors spoke slowly to him, exaggerating their patience. Nurses smiled too brightly, their eyes dull with dismissal. And when visitors came, lawyers, executives, distant relatives, their politeness carried an edge, as though they were indulging a harmless but embarrassing child. Kehinde seemed unaware. He asked simple questions at inappropriate times. He clapped softly when meals arrived, thanking the staff with exaggerated enthusiasm. Once he tried to tip a nurse with a crumpled receipt, apologizing when she frowned. Laughter followed him everywhere. Hawa watched from the edges, pushing her cart, wiping counters, memorizing the rhythm of his days. And slowly, almost against her will, she began to notice the cracks. He never forgot numbers. He might forget names, but when a doctor mentioned medication, dosages, Kahinda corrected him gently, then immediately laughed and said he was probably wrong. When financial documents appeared at the bedside, he scanned them, once eyes moving quickly, before scribbling childish drawings in the margins. And always, always when he thought no one was watching, his gaze sharpened. One afternoon, as Hawa cleaned the sitting area outside his suite, raised voices echoed down the corridor. "You can't keep avoiding this, Kahinde," a woman said sharply. Hawa recognized the voice from television interviews and society pages. Vanessa Cole Adebayo. Hawa slowed her movements, careful not to draw attention. "I'm not avoiding," Kahinde replied lightly. "I'm resting. Doctors say rest is good for brains," Vanessa scoffed. "Don't do that. Not with me." There was a pause. "I know people think you're limited," she continued, lowering her voice. "But I see potential. With the right woman by your side, the company could be stabilized. Your aunt agrees." Hawa felt a chill. "Does she?" Kahinda asked, his tone curious, almost innocent. "Yes, and I've been very patient." Vanessa's heels clicked as she moved closer. "I've defended you publicly. I've stood by you while others laughed. That deserves something in return." Hawa's grip tightened on her cloth. Kahinda laughed, then a high, careless sound. "You're funny. You talk like the women in movies." Vanessa's voice hardened. "This isn't a joke." "Oh." He tilted his head. "I thought everything was a joke. That's what people say about me." The silence that followed was heavy. Vanessa exhaled sharply. "We'll talk later, when you're in a better mood." Her footsteps retreated. Hawa stayed frozen until the corridor was empty again. That evening, during a short break, Hawa sat on a bench outside the hospital wing, scrolling through her phone. A message from her mother waited. "The pain is back. The doctor says I need new medicine." Hawa closed her eyes. She counted the money she had left mentally, carefully. It wouldn't be enough this month. Back inside the hospital floor, buzzed with quiet excitement. Vanessa's visit had not gone unnoticed. Nurses whispered, orderlies exchanged knowing looks. "She's serious about him," someone murmured. "Serious about the money," another replied. Later that night, as Hawa cleaned the suite, Vanessa returned, this time unannounced. She swept into the room, perfumed and confident, ignoring Hawa completely. "Shoo," she said without looking. "Give us privacy." Hawa hesitated. "Ma, I was told to." Vanessa finally looked at her, eyes cold. "Do you know who I am?" Hawa swallowed. "Yes, Ma." "Then act like it." Hawa stepped back, but before she could leave, Kahinda spoke. "She's cleaning," he said mildly. "If she leaves, the room will be dirty." "I don't like dirt." Vanessa laughed, sharp and dismissive. "You don't like many things, Kahinda. That doesn't mean you get to decide." She turned to Hawa. "Go." Kahinda looked at Hawa, eyes dull again, foolishness carefully restored. "It's okay," he said softly. "She's important." The words stung more than Hawa expected. She left without another word. In the corridor, Vanessa's laughter followed her. "See, even he knows his place." Hawa finished her shift with shaking hands. The next morning, the humiliation continued. At the staff station, Vanessa stood with Mrs. Ngozi Okafor, gesturing toward Hawa, as if she were an object. "This one," Vanessa said. "She's always around him, watching, listening." Mrs. Ngozi frowned. "Are you accusing her of something I'm saying? Poor girls get ideas when they see money." Vanessa replied lightly. "It's human nature." Hawa felt every eye turn toward her. "She's nothing," Vanessa added, lowering her voice just enough to carry. "Just a cleaner." Something inside Hawa hardened. Later that day, Kahinda did something unexpected. During a routine check, a junior doctor asked him a question. Kahinda answered incorrectly on purpose. The doctor smirked. Vanessa smiled triumphantly. Then Kahinda turned to Hawa, who was cleaning nearby. "Miss Cleaner," he said loudly, "do you think I'm right?" The room stilled. Hawa froze. "Sir, tell me," he insisted, clapping his hands. "You look smart." Laughter rippled around the room. Hawa felt her face burn. She shook her head. "I don't know, sir." Kahinda nodded thoughtfully. "See, even she agrees I don't know things." The laughter grew louder, but as he turned away, his eyes met Hawa's again, just for a heartbeat. There was apology there, and warning. That night, Hawa sat on her mattress, staring at the ceiling. "Why do rich people like to embarrass others?" Aisha asked quietly from beside her. Hawa didn't answer. She thought of Kahinda's eyes, of Vanessa's smile, of the way power twisted kindness into weakness and humility into invisibility. She understood something then, deep in her bones. Kahinda Adeniyi was not weak. He was hiding, and whatever game was being played around him, it was far more dangerous than she had first believed. The pressure began quietly, the way most dangerous things did. It started with a change in tone. When Hawa Sadia arrived for her shift the next morning, the smiles that had once been distant but polite were gone. Conversation stopped when she approached. Doors closed a little faster. Even the air on the private floor felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were listening. At mid-morning, Tunda Balogan, the director of human resources, summoned her. His office overlooked the lagoon, a view reserved for people whose decisions shaped lives they would never meet. Hawa stood near the door, hands folded, eyes lowered. "You've been here a few months now," Tunda said, tapping a pen against his desk. "No complaints. That's good. Thank you, Sir Hawa," replied softly. He studied her for a moment. "You work near Mr. Adeniyi more than most staff." "Yes, sir. You see a lot." Hawa felt the shift immediately. "Only my work, sir." Tunde smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. Still, management likes clarity. We'd like you to be helpful." She waited. "If Mr. Adeniyi behaves strangely," Tunda continued, "forgets things, says odd things, reacts emotionally, report it. Directly to me." Hawa's heart thudded. "Is there a problem with him, sir? That depends on perspective," Tunda said lightly. "We just want to protect the company." Hawa nodded, though something inside her recoiled. As she turned to leave, Tunda added, "And Hawa loyalty is remembered here. Disloyalty, too." Outside the office, she leaned against the wall until her breathing steadied. That afternoon, Mrs. Funmilayo Adeniyi arrived. She did not come often, but when she did, the floor rearranged itself around her. Nurses straightened. Doctors spoke carefully. Even security stood a little taller. She was Kahinda's aunt, yes, but more importantly, she was power wrapped in silk. Hawa watched from a distance as Funmilayo entered the suite without knocking. "Kahinda," she said warmly, arms open. "My dear boy." Kahinda beamed, clapping his hands. "Auntie, you came to see me." "Of course." Funmilayo kissed his cheek. "How is your head today?" "It's still there," Kahinda replied cheerfully. "I checked." She laughed indulgently. "Always joking." But when she turned away, her face hardened. Later, Hawa was instructed to prepare tea for the suite. On the tray alongside the usual cup and saucer lay a small packet labeled with neat handwriting. "New prescription, Mrs. Ngozi Okafor," said briskly. "Special sleep aid." The doctor approved it. Hawa stared at the packet. "Isn't he already on medication?" she asked carefully. Mrs. Ngozi's eyes narrowed. "Are you a doctor?" No, Ma. Then do your job. Hawa picked up the tray, her hands unsteady. Inside the suite, Kahinda sat by the window watching traffic crawl below. When he saw the tray, his smile flickered just slightly. "Oh," he said, "more tea." "Yes, sir," Hawa replied. She placed the tray on the table, then hesitated. The packet seemed heavier than it should have been. "Is something wrong?" Kahinda asked. Voice light. Hawa felt every warning bell inside her chest ring at once. She thought of Tunde's office, of Funmilayo's smile, of Vanessa's laughter. I will be right back, sir," she said quickly. She took the tray and left the room. In the service area, her hands shook as she examined the packet. She couldn't read all the medical terms, but she recognized one word: sedative. Strong. Too strong. Hawa swallowed hard. She thought of her mother, of the money she needed, of how easily people like her were replaced. Then she thought of Kahinda's eyes, the sharpness beneath the foolishness, the silent warning. She made her decision. Hawa prepared the tea again, this time without the packet. Instead, she added a mild herbal blend she kept for her own stomach pains, nothing dangerous, nothing unusual. When she returned to the suite, Kahinda watched her closely. "Different smell," he observed. "Yes, sir," she said, forcing calm. "New blend." He nodded, sipping carefully. Nothing happened. No drowsiness, no slump. Just quiet. That evening, Hawa received a message from Aisha. "Supervisor came to our room asking about you." Fear slid down her spine. The next day, the pressure increased. Mrs. Ngozi began hovering during Hawa's shifts, inspecting her work with exaggerated scrutiny. Tunda Balogun sent follow-up messages asking if she had noticed anything concerning. Funmilayo visited again, this time bringing Vanessa Cole Adebayo with her. Vanessa smiled sweetly at Kahinda, touching his arm. "You look better," she said. "Rest is good for you." Kahinda grinned. "I sleep when people stop talking." Vanessa laughed too loudly. Hawa stood near the wall, invisible again. That night, as she cleaned the adjoining sitting area, she noticed something odd. One of the security cameras positioned to monitor the corridor outside Kahinda's suite was dark. She frowned, stepping closer. The indicator light was off. Cameras were never off. Her pulse quickened. She scanned the ceiling, the corners. Another camera blinked steadily. This one didn't. Hawa glanced around, then quietly fetched a stool. Reaching up, she touched the camera housing. It was loose. Behind it, taped carefully, was a small black device, a recorder. Hawa's breath caught. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. She quickly removed the device, slipped it into her pocket, and climbed down just as Mrs. Ngozi appeared. "What are you doing?" Mrs. Ngozi snapped. "Cleaning the camera," Hawa replied, voice steady despite the pounding in her ears. "Dust builds up." Mrs. Ngozi stared at her, suspicious. "Be quick." That night, Hawa barely slept. She held the recorder in her hand, afraid to turn it on, afraid not to. At dawn, she listened. Voices filled the room, clear, unmistakable. Tunde Balogun, Mrs. Funmilayo. A third voice she didn't recognize. "As long as he remains unstable, the board can intervene," Funmilayo was saying. "The medication will make it undeniable," Tunde replied. "And the girl?" the third voice asked. "She's nobody," Funmilayo said coldly. "If she talks, we handle it." Hawa's hands trembled. At the hospital later that day, Kahinda sat unusually still. His playful energy was gone, replaced by a quiet tension. "Do you like sleeping?" he asked suddenly as Hawa wiped the table. "Yes, sir," she answered. "I don't," he said softly. "Bad things happen when I sleep." Hawa looked at him, then really looked at him. For the first time she understood. This was no game. This was survival. And somehow, impossibly, she was standing in the middle of it. After the night, she discovered the recorder. Hawa Sadia stopped thinking in hours and started thinking in risks. She hid the small black device inside the lining of her bag, stitching the tear, closed with careful trembling fingers, before dawn. Every sound in the compound startled her. Every knock made her heart jump. By the time she reached the private hospital floor, she had already lived through 10 different fears. She told no one. At work, the day unfolded with unnatural calm. Nurses chatted softly. Doctors came and went. The corridor camera that had gone dark the night before was back on its red light, blinking steadily, as if nothing had ever been wrong. Hawa kept her head down and watched. Kehinde Adeniyi was scheduled for a series of routine checks. He played his role perfectly, forgetting his date of birth, asking the same question twice, clapping when the blood pressure cuff beeped. The staff smiled indulgently. Notes were taken. From the corner of the room, Hawa noticed Tunda Balogun, observing through the glass arm's folded expression, unreadable. Later during cleaning, Hawa found a folded note tucked beneath the edge of the bedside table. It wasn't addressed to her, but she knew it was meant for her the moment she saw the clumsy handwriting. Some people listen to walls. Some people listen to hearts. She slipped the note into her pocket, pulse racing. That afternoon, Mrs. Funmilayo Adeniyi returned, this time alone. She dismissed the nurse and sat across from Kehinde, her smile practiced. "My dear," she said gently, "the board is worried." Kehinde tilted his head. "About what about you?" She sighed, reaching for his hand. "You're tired, confused. You need help. Proper help." "I have help," Kehinde replied brightly. "Doctors, nurses, cleaners." Funmilayo's fingers tightened slightly. "Not that kind." Hawa wiped the counter quietly, ears straining. "There are discussions," Funmilayo continued. "Evaluations, temporary measures, just until you're yourself again." Kehinde laughed. "I like myself." Funmilayo smiled thinly. "We all do, but the company can't run on jokes." She stood smoothing her dress. "Rest, Kehinde. Big decisions are coming." When she left the room, felt colder. That evening, Hawa stayed late to clean. The corridor was empty, the air humming softly with machines and distant traffic. As she finished wiping the glass panels, she noticed something else. Another camera angled slightly differently than before. It wasn't supposed to face the suite. She stared at it, then glanced around. No one was watching. Carefully, she adjusted the angle back to where it belonged. A minute later, her phone vibrated. An unknown number. "Don't touch what isn't yours." Hawa's breath caught. She looked up sharply. The corridor was still empty. She typed nothing back. Instead, she turned off her phone and slipped it into her pocket. That night, she listened to more of the recording. The conversations painted a clear picture: medication changes, manipulated reports, staged observations. Kehinde's foolishness wasn't being treated. It was being manufactured, and she was the only one who knew. The next morning, Hawa found Dr. Samuel Mensah waiting near the supply room. He didn't speak at first. He simply handed her a clipboard. "Your name is on the roster for night duty again," he said quietly. "Yes, sir." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Has anything unusual happened recently?" Hawa's heart hammered. She thought of the phone message, the cameras, the recorder burning like a secret in her bag. I don't know what you mean," she replied. Dr. Mensah studied her face, then nodded slowly. "Be careful," he said. "Some illnesses are not in the body." That night, the hospital floor was unusually quiet. Kehinde paced his room restless. Hawa cleaned in silence, her movements precise. She felt eyes on her, though she saw no one. "Do you ever get tired of cleaning?" Kehinde asked suddenly. "Yes, sir," Hawa answered honestly. "Why do you keep doing it?" She paused. "Because someone has to," Kehinde smiled faintly. "That's what they say about running companies." He stopped pacing and looked at her foolishness absent for just a second. "If you found something bad," he said softly, "would you throw it away?" Hawa met his gaze. "No, sir." "Would you hide it?" "Yes, sir." "Would you protect it?" Her throat tightened. "If it was important." Kahinda nodded, satisfied. Then he laughed loudly, clapping his hands. "You're very serious for a cleaner." Footsteps approached. A nurse appeared, frowning. "Everything okay here?" she asked. "Perfect," Kahinde chirped. The next day brought another test. During visiting hours, Vanessa Coladabayo arrived with flowers and cameras, media invited under the guise of a charity update. She sat close to Kahinda, smiling warmly, playing the role of devoted partner. Hawa stood near the door, invisible again. "People worry about you," Vanessa said sweetly. "They think you don't understand what's happening around you." Kahinda blinked. "Is something happening?" Vanessa laughed gently. "Always joking." She turned to the camera. "Kahinda is strong, but strength needs support." Her hand brushed his arm, lingering. Later, as the cameras left, Vanessa's smile vanished. "You," she said sharply to Hawa, blocking her path. "You think you're clever?" Hawa lowered her eyes. "No, ma." Vanessa leaned closer. "People like you should remember their place." Hawa said nothing. That evening, Hawa was called back to Tunda Balogan's office. "You've been very quiet," Tunda said, steepling his fingers. "That can be good, or suspicious. I just work," Hawa replied. Tunda smiled thinly. "We're adjusting Mr. Adenia's treatment tonight. New dosage. Make sure he takes it." Hawa felt her chest tighten. "Sir, the doctor." The doctor signed off. Tunde cut in. "Unless you're refusing." Hawa shook her head. "No, sir." She left the office with her legs trembling. In the service room, she examined the packet. Stronger than before. Different label, different color. Her mind raced. She remembered the recorder, the voices, the words. "If she talks, we handle it." Hawa made her choice. She prepared the tea again, carefully, deliberately swapping the contents as she had before. She hid the packet in her bag, alongside the recorder. When she brought the tray in, Kahinda watched her closely. "Is it time to sleep?" he asked lightly. "Yes, sir." He took the cup, then paused. "Do you believe people can pretend for a long time?" Hawa swallowed. "Yes, sir, and still tell the truth." She met his eyes. "Sometimes that's the only way." Kahinda drank the tea. Nothing happened. Minutes passed, then an hour. Outside the room, raised voices erupted. "Why isn't it working?" someone hissed. Hawa stood very still. Later that night, she returned to her room and finally allowed herself to cry, silent tears soaking into her pillow. She was a cleaner, poor, replaceable, and yet somehow she was standing between a powerful man and something that wanted him broken or dead. As she wiped her face, she understood something that terrified her. They would not stop. And the closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous her silence would become. The night duty roster felt like a sentence. When Hawa Sadia saw her name written beside overnight executive wing, her stomach tightened so hard she could barely breathe. It was not just the hours. It was the isolation. At night, the private hospital floor belonged to shadows and surveillance, quiet enough for secrets to move without being noticed, and for accidents to look like bad luck. She arrived just before 9 p.m. Uniform, freshly pressed scarf pinned neatly under her chin. The corridor lights were dimmed to a soft glow. The smell of disinfectant hung in the air like a warning. At the nurse's station, 2 staff members glanced at her, then looked away. "Only you tonight?" Hawa asked, forcing her voice to remain steady. A nurse shrugged. "Security is around." Security. Hawa knew that word didn't always mean protection. Down the hall behind his suite door, Kahinde Adeniye was awake. He had been awake for too long. Even before Hawa arrived, his mind was running in circles, memories, calculations, patterns. The foolishness he wore during the day took effort. At night, effort became pain. When sleep refused him, everything else followed: headaches, tremors, and the creeping fear that one exhausted mistake would cost him the company, his life, and the last pieces of control he still held. He had been pretending for months, maybe years, depending on how one counted survival. And every night someone tried to make him truly powerless. When Hawa entered his suite to begin her cleaning routine, Kahinda sat on the edge of his bed, palms pressed to his temples. His shoulders were tense, his breathing shallow. He forced a laugh as soon as he saw her. "Miss Cleaner," he announced too loudly as if the walls were an audience. "You came to scrub my sadness away." Hawa lowered her eyes. "Good evening, sir." She moved quietly, wiping surfaces, straightening towels, checking the trash bin. She could feel his gaze following her, sharp and restless, beneath the playful tone. Minutes passed. The suite's air felt thick, almost electric. Hawa's body stayed calm through practice, but her mind counted exits, the door behind her. The service hallway to the left, the emergency stairwell. 2 turns away. Her bag with the recorder and the swapped sedative packets was hidden inside a supply cabinet she had quietly claimed as her own corner. She had learned to keep dangerous things close. "Do you hear that?" Kahinda asked suddenly. Hawa paused. "Hear what, sir? The quiet." He laughed again, but it was strained. "It's loud tonight." Hawa swallowed. She kept cleaning. "Maybe it's because the city is sleeping." Kahinda's jaw tightened. Lagos never sleeps. Only the poor sleep, because they have no one trying to poison their dreams. The words fell into the room, like a stone. Hawa froze. Kahinda blinked as if surprised by what had slipped out. Then he clapped his hands and smiled broadly, foolish again. "Did I say poison? I meant pepper in the soup." Hawa's heart hammered. She forced herself to nod and continue. Outside in the corridor, a security guard strolled past, slow, deliberate, glancing at the suite door, before moving on. Hawa felt the hair on her arms rise. At 11 p.m., Dr. Samuel Mensah appeared, briefly checking on Kahinda, with the careful expression of a man who had learned that medicine could be used as a weapon. "How is he tonight?" the doctor asked Hawa quietly near the door. Hawa hesitated. Her instinct screamed not to speak, but Dr. Mensah's eyes held something different from Tunde's and Funmilayo's. Not hunger, not contempt. "Restless," she said, finally. "Very restless." Dr. Mensah nodded, lowering his voice. "If anything feels wrong, anything, call me directly." "Not the desk." Before Hawa could respond, Kahinda called out from the bed with a bright, childish voice. "Doctor, my head is full of birds again." Dr. Mensah's expression didn't change, but his eyes flicked toward Hawa in a quick, loaded glance. Then he turned and stepped out. Midnight arrived with a sudden change. Kahinda stopped performing. It wasn't dramatic. It was worse, quiet, like a dam cracking beneath the surface. He rose from the bed and paced the room slower than before, hands trembling now that he was no longer forcing them still. His breathing grew uneven. Hawa tried to focus on the sink, on the cloth in her hand, on the small, safe rhythm of wiping, but her body sensed danger, the way skin senses fire. Kahinda halted near the window. "I can't do it tonight," he whispered. Hawa kept her eyes down. "Do what, sir? Sleep?" His voice was raw. "Every time I sleep, something gets closer." Silence filled the space between them. Hawa's mouth went dry. She thought of the recording in her bag, the voices, the plan, one final dose. Kahinda turned slowly, and for the first time since she'd met him, his eyes looked openly terrified. "You're still here," he said, almost like he didn't believe it. They didn't scare you away. Hawa's chest tightened. I'm only doing my job, sir. Kahinda laughed weakly. No, don't lie. People like you don't stay near a storm unless they have a reason. Hawa's hands trembled. Sir, you should rest. He took a step toward her, then stopped as if remembering something distance power the way the world would accuse her if he moved too close. I tried everything, Kahinde murmured, voice cracking. Doctors, pills, therapies, prayer houses. Nothing works. It's like my brain refuses peace. His lips curled bitterly. Maybe peace doesn't belong to men with money. Hawa looked up before she could stop herself. Kahinda saw the concern in her face and flinched as if kindness hurt. Then unexpectedly, his knees bent. He didn't fall. He lowered himself slowly, carefully onto the carpet near the foot of the bed shoulders, shaking with something he had held back for years. The sight hit Hawa like a blow. A billionaire CEO kneeling like a child, stripped of the armor the world had mocked. Hawa, he said her name barely audible. Hawa's throat tightened. Sir, please don't, I heard you once, he interrupted, eyes wet but fierce. When you thought no one was listening, you were humming. Not for me, for yourself. He swallowed hard. It felt safe. Hawa's hands hovered in the air, unsure what to do. Every rule of survival screamed at her to step back, to protect herself, to remember her place. But another truth rose quietly above fear. He was human, and no one else in this building seemed to remember that. Kahinda's voice broke. Please, he whispered. Just for a few minutes. Help me sleep. If I don't sleep, I'll lose my mind. And if I lose my mind, they win. Hawa's eyes stung. She thought of her mother at home, groaning through pain. She thought of Vanessa's cold smile, of Funmalayo's soft voice hiding sharp intentions, of Tunde's warning about loyalty, of the recorder in her bag like a burning coal. Then she thought of the lullaby her own mother used to sing when storms hit the roof in Katsina, how the song didn't stop the rain, but it made the fear smaller. Hawa sat carefully on the chair beside the bed, leaving space between them, her posture respectful and trembling. I don't have a beautiful voice, she said quietly. Kahinda shook his head. I don't need beauty. I need peace. Hawa inhaled slowly as if drawing courage into her lungs. Then she began to hum. It was low at first, soft, steady, a simple melody with no performance in it. A song built from survival, from mothers who sang to hungry children, from women who soothed pain with nothing but voice and faith. Kahinda's shoulders eased, his breathing slowed, his eyes, so sharp and fearful, began to soften like a clenched fist, unclenching. Hawa kept humming even as tears slipped down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them. She didn't stop. Minutes passed. Kahinda's head tilted slightly, resting against the bed frame. His eyelids fluttered, fighting, then surrendering. And finally his body went still. He was asleep. A deep, heavy, peaceful sleep. Hawa's heart pounded as if she had just run through fire. She watched him carefully, afraid to move, afraid the smallest sound might break the spell. Outside the suite, the corridor remained silent. But somewhere above the door, a small indicator light blinked once. A camera, recording. And on a screen in another room, someone watched the poor maid hum a lullaby to the foolish CEO, watched him fall asleep like a child in her presence, and smiled slowly as if they had just found the evidence they needed. Hawa didn't know it yet, but by morning, her kindness would be turned into a weapon against her. Morning came too bright, the kind of bright that made everything look clean, even lies. When Hawa Sadia stepped off the staff elevator at 6:30 a.m., the private floor felt different, too quiet, too arranged. The nurse's station was unusually busy, yet no one spoke to her. They glanced up, glanced away, and held their silence like a secret. Hawa's body sensed it before her mind could name it. Something had shifted. She tightened her grip on her bag and walked toward the supply closet where she had hidden the recorder. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears. If anyone had entered overnight, if anyone had searched her things, everything was finished. The closet door was slightly open. Hawa froze. She pushed it gently. Inside, the shelves looked untouched. The mop bucket sat where she left it. Her cleaning liquids were lined up, but her bag was not there. A cold wave swept through her chest. She backed out slowly, forcing her face to remain blank. Panic would only make her visible. As she turned, she nearly collided with Mrs. Ngozi Okafor, who stood in the corridor as if she had been waiting. "Hawa, Mrs. Ngozi," said voice smooth. "You're early." "Yes, ma," Hawa replied. Mrs. Ngozi's eyes scanned her lingering on her hands. "Where is your bag?" Hawa swallowed. I left it in the changing room." Mrs. Ngozi smiled faintly. "Good. Then you won't mind coming with me." Hawa's stomach dropped. They walked toward a small staff office near the back exit, an area Hawa rarely entered. 2 security guards stood outside the door. One of them was new broad-shouldered with eyes that did not blink much. Inside, Tunda Balogan sat behind a desk, calm as a man signing a routine form. Beside him stood Vanessa Adebayo, dressed in cream and gold, as if she had come to a celebration. On the table lay Hawa's bag unzipped. Her throat tightened. Hawa Tunde said mildly, "Sit." Hawa remained standing. "Sir, why is my bag here?" Vanessa laughed softly. "Listen to her, like she doesn't know." Tunda folded his hands. "A complaint has been made." Hawa's mouth went dry. About what Sir Vanessa stepped forward, holding up a small velvet pouch between her fingers. "This," she said. "My bracelet." Hawa stared. "I don't understand." Vanessa opened the pouch. A gold bracelet glittered inside, expensive enough to pay Hawa's rent for a year. "I left it in Mr. Adeniyi's suite yesterday," Vanessa said calmly. "And this morning it was missing." Hawa's mind raced. "I didn't," she began. Tunde raised a hand. "We found it in your bag." Hawa's breath caught. She looked at her bag as if it belonged to someone else. "That is not mine," she whispered. "Someone put it there." Vanessa's eyes shone with satisfaction. "Of course. Always someone else. Poor girls never steal, they only suffer." "Right." Hawa's hands started to shake. "Sir, please. I didn't take anything." Mrs. Ngozi clicked her tongue. "Hawa, you were on night duty. You were alone with him. You've been too close." "Too close," Hawa repeated, stunned. "I was cleaning. That is all." Vanessa leaned in, voice low and sharp. "Don't pretend you don't know what you were doing last night." Hawa's heart slammed. The lullaby, the sleep, the camera. She understood then. They had recorded her. Not to see kindness, but to twist it into shame. Tunde stood. "Company policy is clear. Theft is immediate dismissal and possible police involvement." Hawa's knees weakened. "Sir, please. I have my mother. She is sick. I need this job." Vanessa smiled without warmth. "Should have thought of that before you reached for what isn't yours." Hawa's vision blurred. She fought to keep her voice steady. "Sir," she said, turning to Tunda, "I have never stolen anything. Check the cameras. Check the records. Ask anyone." Vanessa laughed again. "Cameras. Oh, we checked. And we saw you. We saw how you were with him." Tunde's gaze sharpened slightly. "Mr. Adeniyi has also been informed." Hawa's head snapped up. "He knows." "Yes," Tunde replied. "He'll decide what to do." A part of Hawa wanted to run, to flee the building, to disappear into Lagos and never return. But another part, the stubborn part that had survived hunger and shame, refused. "I want to speak to him," she said quietly. Vanessa's smile widened. "Of course you do." Two guards escorted Hawa down the corridor toward Kahinda's suite. As they walked, Hawa could feel eyes following her nurses' orderlies, even doctors watching like spectators at a street drama. Some looked curious, some looked amused, none looked kind. At the suite door, one guard knocked once, then opened it. Kahinda sat in a chair near the window, wearing a robe, hair slightly messy. He looked like a man who had finally slept, but the softness in his face vanished the moment he saw Hawa. Not with recognition, with performance. His eyes widened comically. His mouth opened in exaggerated surprise. "Hawa!" he exclaimed loudly. "Why are you here with police people?" Hawa's throat tightened at the sound of his voice, too loud, too foolish. The mask was back on, stronger than ever. Tunde entered behind her, Vanessa close as a shadow. "Mr. Adeniyi," Tunde said smoothly. "We found this in Hawa's bag." He held out the bracelet. Kahinda leaned forward, squinting dramatically. "Shiny is it candy?" Vanessa let out a delighted laugh. "Kahinda, darling." Kahinda clapped his hands. "Vanessa, your wrist toy." Hawa stood, frozen shame burning her face. She searched his eyes for the man from last night, the man who had begged for sleep, who had looked at her like she mattered. But Kahinda stared at her as if she were a stranger. Vanessa stepped closer, placing a hand on Kahinda's shoulder. "She stole from me," Vanessa said softly, and her voice became even softer, loaded with implication. "She has been inappropriate with you." The room went still. Hawa's lungs tightened. She couldn't breathe properly. Kahinda blinked, then laughed loudly. "Inappropriate." Like, tickling Vanessa's smile faltered, slightly annoyed. Tunde cleared his throat. "Sir, we need your instruction. Should we involve the police?" Hawa's lips trembled. "Sir," she whispered, "please. I did not steal. Someone put it there. I swear." Kahinda stared at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, a foolish, empty smile. "She's just a cleaner," he said brightly. "Cleaners touch many things. Maybe she touched the bracelet by mistake." Vanessa's eyes gleamed triumphantly. Tunde nodded as if satisfied. "So you agree she is responsible?" Kahinda shrugged exaggeratedly. "I don't know. My head is full of birds." Laughter rippled from Vanessa. Hawa felt something inside her crack. She looked at Kahinda, voice shaking. "Last night." Kahinda's smile tightened, and for a split second, so fast it could have been imagined, his eyes sharpened. "A warning. Don't say it." Hawa swallowed the words that might save him but destroy her. Then Kahinda turned his gaze away, foolishness returning like a curtain dropping. "Take her away," he said lightly, as if discussing a misplaced object. "I don't like drama when I'm trying to think." The guard stepped forward. Hawa's knees buckled, but she forced herself upright. She would not beg in front of Vanessa. As they dragged her out, Hawa caught one last glimpse of Kahinda. His hands were trembling under the robe. His eyes stayed fixed on the window, and his jaw was clenched so tightly it looked like it hurt. He was pretending. But for the first time, Hawa understood the cost of his pretending. Outside the suite, the corridor swallowed her. Nurses stared. Someone whispered, "Gold digger." Another voice said, "Poor people are always the same." Hawa's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. They pushed her toward the back exit where security processed staff discipline cases. The air outside hit her face, hot, dusty, cruelly normal. At the gate, a police officer stood waiting, and beside him, Vanessa watched with a satisfied smile, as if justice had been served. Hawa's hands shook as the officer reached for her wrist. She looked back at the hospital tower one last time. Somewhere inside, Kahinda Adeniyi was finally awake in a world that insisted he was foolish. And she, the only person who had cared, was being destroyed for it. The holding room smelled of metal and old sweat. It was small, windowless, and painted a dull gray that seemed designed to erase time. Hawa Sadia sat on a narrow bench, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the floor. A single ceiling fan rattled above her, pushing warm air in slow, uneven circles. Across from her, a police officer flipped through paperwork without urgency. "Name," he said without looking up. "Hawa Sadia. Occupation cleaner." The word felt heavier than it ever had before. The officer nodded, scribbling. "Accused of theft. Statement says you were found with stolen property belonging to Vanessa Cole Adebayo." Hawa swallowed. "I didn't steal anything." He glanced up briefly. "Everyone says that." Hours passed in fragments, questions repeated, forms signed, silence stretched. No lawyer arrived. No manager came to speak for her. To the system, she was exactly what she looked like: poor, replaceable, convenient. She thought of her mother again, of the missed call she hadn't returned, of the money she was supposed to send that week. Fear settled into her bones. In another part of the city, Kahinda Adenia sat alone in his suite, the door closed, the laughter gone. The moment Hawa had been dragged away, the world had felt wrong, not dramatic wrong, quietly, dangerously wrong. He had played his role perfectly, too perfectly. Now the silence pressed against his skull like a vice. He rose and paced, hands clenched, jaw tight. The mask he wore for months had become heavier with every breath. The act protected him, yes, but it also demanded sacrifices. And today, it had demanded Hawa. The thought burned. He remembered her face when he told them to take her away. The way her eyes had searched his, not for rescue, but for understanding. The way she had swallowed her words to protect him. Kahinda slammed his fist against the wall. "Stupid!" He muttered, not at her but at himself. He reached for his phone, then stopped. Too many ears, too many watchers. Instead, he pressed the call button by the bed. "Get me Dr. Mensah," he said when the nurse answered. "Now." Back in the holding room, the door creaked open. Hawa looked up, bracing herself for another officer, another accusation. Instead, Dr. Samuel Mensah stepped inside. Her breath caught. "Doctor." He raised a finger gently. "Quiet," he said. "I'm not officially here." The officer outside glanced in, then looked away when Dr. Mensah nodded. Whatever authority the doctor carried extended even into places like this. Dr. Mensah pulled a chair close and sat, lowering his voice. "I heard what happened," he said. "About the bracelet." Hawa nodded, tears threatening. "They put it in my bag." "I know," he replied simply. Her head snapped up. You know," he sighed. "I've been watching longer than you think. Not the cameras, the patterns." Hawa's hands trembled. "They're trying to kill him," she whispered before fear could stop her. "Slowly, with medicine." Dr. Mensah's eyes hardened. "Yes." The confirmation hit her like a wave. "I tried to stop it." Hawa continued, words spilling out now. "I changed the tea. I found a recorder. I have it." Dr. Mensah leaned forward sharply. "You have proof?" "Yes." She nodded desperately. "They talked about declaring him unfit, about handling me if I talked." For a moment, the doctor said nothing. Then he exhaled slowly. "You've done more than anyone in that building," he said quietly. "And that's why they're breaking you." Hawa's voice shook. "What will happen to me?" Dr. Mensah met her gaze. "That depends on what you choose to do next." Before she could ask what he meant, footsteps approached. The officer returned, frowning. "Time's up, Doc." Dr. Mensah stood. "Listen to me," he whispered urgently. "Say nothing more to anyone, not even me. Protect what you have." "But I will do my part," he said. "And Kahinda. He's closer to the end of this than they realize." Then he stepped out, leaving Hawa alone again. Night fell, outside the holding room unnoticed. At midnight, Hawa was released. Not cleared, not forgiven, just pushed back into the world with a warning and a thin sheet of paper, ordering her to appear again if summoned. Vanessa had decided not to press charges. An act of mercy, the officer said dryly. Hawa knew better. Mercy meant leverage. She walked out into the Lagos night with no job, no money, and a secret heavy enough to crush her. The city swallowed her whole, lights blurring through tears she no longer fought. She returned to the compound in Surulere, long after Aisha had fallen asleep. She lay on her mattress staring at the ceiling, the recorder clutched to her chest like a lifeline. For the first time since arriving in Lagos, Hawa considered leaving, disappearing, letting the powerful eat each other alive. But when she closed her eyes, she saw Kahinda on his knees, voice shaking, begging for sleep. Not as a billionaire, but as a man drowning in his own world. And she knew she couldn't walk away. The next morning, Hawa returned to the hospital, not as an employee. She waited outside the executive wing, sitting on a bench with other visitors, invisible again. Hours passed. Security ignored her. Nurses walked by without recognition. Finally, she saw Jonah Dlamini, the head of security, stepping out of the elevator. He stopped when he saw her. "You're not supposed to be here," he said flatly. "I know," Hawa replied, "but someone is trying to kill Mr. Adeniyi." Jonah's eyes narrowed. "Careful. I have proof," she said. "Audio, dates, names." Jonah studied her face for a long moment. He was a man trained to read threats. He saw no manipulation there, only exhaustion and resolve. "Come with me," he said quietly. They entered a small security office away from the main corridor. Hawa placed the recorder on the table with shaking hands. Jonah listened in silence. Funmilayo's voice filled the room. Tunde's. The plan unfolding piece by piece. Jonah's jaw tightened. "This is serious." "I know," Hawa whispered. He leaned back thinking. "You understand what this means for you?" "Yes." "For him, yes." Jonah nodded slowly. "Then you're braver than most people I know." At the same time, in the suite upstairs, Kahinda stood before the mirror staring at his own reflection. The foolish smile was gone. "Almost time," he murmured. He had known this day would come, the day the mask would no longer be enough, the day the predators would move openly, and when they did, he would need allies. He thought of Hawa, poor quiet, Hawa, who had done more for him than his wealth, his education, his power ever had. A knock sounded at the door. "Sir," a guard said cautiously. "Dr. Mensah is requesting to see you. Urgent." Kahinda smiled, not foolishly this time, but with cold clarity. "Good," he said. "It's time." As Hawa left the security office later that afternoon, Jonah stopped her. "Whatever happens next," he said, "they won't go down quietly." Hawa nodded. "Neither will I." She walked into the sun with fear still clinging to her, but beneath it something stronger had begun to form. Resolve. She was still poor, still vulnerable, still invisible to most of the world. But now she was no longer alone, and the truth, once seen, could not be unseen. The city did not pause for conspiracies. Traffic still snarled along Ikorodu Road. Vendors still argued over prices. News tickers still scrolled with celebrity scandals and stock updates. But inside Adeniyi Group, the ground had begun to shift, and those who felt it first were the ones standing closest to power. By mid-morning, word spread that Mrs. Funmilayo Adeniyi would address the board. It was framed as routine. Family reassurance, the memo said. Stability. Behind the language lay urgency. The night's failure. The dose that hadn't worked, the sleep that came too naturally, had rattled them. When plans rely on precision, unpredictability feels like a threat. In the executive conference room, glass walls reflected tailored suits and careful smiles. Tunde Balogun took his seat near the end of the table phone, face down, jaw set. He avoided eye contact. Across from him, Vanessa Cole Adebayo adjusted her bracelet, a faint bruise on her wrist hidden beneath gold. She had rehearsed grief, then generosity, then forgiveness. Today required control. Funmilayo entered last. She did not raise her voice. She never did. Power did not need volume. My nephew's health, she began folding her hands, has become a liability. For him, for the company, for all of us. Murmurs rippled restrained. Doctors are concerned, she continued. Independent evaluations will be arranged. Temporary guardianship, purely administrative, may be necessary. A board member cleared his throat. Temporary, until clarity. Funmilayo replied smoothly. Until he can rest. Rest. The word settled like a lid. At that same hour, Hawasadia sat in the small security office with Jonah Dlamini, listening to a different kind of meeting unfold on the recorder. Voices overlapped. Decisions sharpened. Jonah paused the audio. "They're moving today," he said quietly. Hawa nodded. She felt it in her bones. They want him declared unfit. Yes, and they'll use whatever they can. He looked at her. "Including you." Hawa inhaled. "I expected that." Jonah studied her, this woman who had lost her job, her safety, her quiet, and still showed up. "I can't promise protection," he said, "but I can buy time." "Time is enough," Hawa replied. They agreed on a simple plan. No heroics, no confrontation. Evidence would surface where it could not be buried through processes, not shouting. Dr. Mensah would prepare his records. Jonah would secure the corridors and logs. Hawa would stay close but unseen. She had learned invisibility well. Upstairs, Kehinde Adeniyi dressed carefully. He chose a plain shirt and trousers. Nothing that invited mockery. Nothing that looked defiant. He practiced the foolish smile in the mirror, then let it fall. Practiced it again. Perfected. When Dr. Samuel Mensah entered, Kehinde didn't pretend. "They're pushing today," Kehinde said. "Yes," the doctor replied. "They've scheduled evaluations. But their case is thin." Kehinde nodded. Thin cases cut deepest when people believe them. Dr. Mensah met his gaze. "You're ready." Kehinde smiled faintly. "I've been ready since the first pill changed color." In the lobby below, cameras gathered. Vanessa arrived with practiced softness, answering questions about charity initiatives and wellness. When asked about Kehinde, she tilted her head, compassionate. "We're focused on his recovery. Recovery from what no one asked." Hawa watched from a distance, seated among visitors, scarf pulled low. Her phone buzzed. Aisha checking in, worried. Hawa typed a brief reassurance she didn't fully believe. By noon, the evaluation team arrived. Clipboards, polite nods, neutral expressions that could be read as care or calculation. They were ushered toward Kehinde's suite. As they passed, Jonah caught Hawa's eye and gave a subtle nod. "Now." Hawa rose and followed at a measured distance, slipping into the corridor as if she belonged there. Years of cleaning had taught her where to stand, when to move, how to disappear between doorways. Inside the suite, the evaluators spoke slowly, as if gentleness might provoke truth. "What day is it?" one asked. Kehinde blinked. "Tuesday." Another smiled. "It's Thursday." "Oh," Kehinde said, delighted. "I always forget Wednesdays." They marked notes. "Do you recognize this person?" a third asked, gesturing to Vanessa, who hovered nearby like a blessing. Kehinde squinted. "Is that my Aunt Funmilayo?" Stiffened. Vanessa laughed lightly. "Silly." More notes. From the corridor, Hawa listened, heart steady now. She had learned something important in the last days. Fear could sharpen you or dull you. She chose sharp. The evaluation paused when Dr. Mensah entered uninvited but unchallenged. "I'd like my records included," he said calmly, placing a folder on the table. "All of them," Funmilayo smiled. "Of course, doctor. Transparency is our goal." Dr. Mensah returned the smile. Good. Minutes stretched. Then something unexpected happened. Kahinda stopped performing. Not abruptly, not dramatically. He simply answered the next question correctly. Then the next. Dates, figures, names. The evaluators exchanged glances. Vanessa's smile wavered. Kahinda looked at them, eyes clear. Am I doing it wrong? He asked softly. Funmilayo's voice cut in. Kahinda, darling. He raised a hand. I'm tired of pretending, he said gently. It hurts my head. Silence. Hawa felt the room's energy shift like air before rain. The lead evaluator cleared his throat. Mr. Adeniyi, are you saying you've been exaggerating symptoms? Kahinda smiled, not foolishly. I'm saying people exaggerate their kindness when they want something. Vanessa stepped forward, sharp. This is inappropriate. He's confused. Am I? Kahinda asked, turning to her. You said I was rich, not smart. Remember, her eyes flashed. You're unwell. Then explain the recordings, Kahinda replied. Funmilayo's head snapped up. What recordings? At that moment, Jonah entered with a technician. The corridor logs, he said, and the audio. The recorder clicked on. Voices filled the room. Funmilayo's measured cruelty. Tunde's compliance, the plan laid bare. The evaluators stiffened. Pens stopped moving. Vanessa stepped back, face pale. Funmilayo's smile hardened. This is a setup. Kahinda nodded. Yes, yours. Chaos followed. Raised voices, hurried calls, legal threats thrown like knives. But something irreversible had occurred. The truth had moved from shadow to glass. Hawa stood near the doorway, unseen by most, watching a lifetime of power fracture in minutes. Kahinda found her then. Not with his eyes, he didn't need to. He felt her presence the way one feels a steady hand in darkness. He reached into his pocket, and when the room calmed just enough, slid a small folded note onto the table near the door. Hawa retrieved it, later fingers trembling. Thank you for keeping me awake when sleep was dangerous. Don't trust the tea. Trust the process. She exhaled a breath she'd been holding for days. By evening, statements were issued. Investigations announced. Temporary measures reversed. Funmilayo departed with her chin high and her lawyers closer. Vanessa left through a side exit, cameras suddenly unwelcome. Hawa stepped back into the city as night fell, the sky bruised purple and gold. The battle wasn't over. She knew that. Power rarely surrendered quietly. But something had changed. For the first time since the holding room, since the bracelet, since the humiliation. Hawa felt the future tilt just a little toward justice. And somewhere above the traffic and noise, a man who had pretended to be foolish slept with one eye open, ready for what came next. The aftermath did not feel like victory. It felt like exposure. By the next morning, a Adeniyi group was wrapped in a careful fog of press releases and legal language. Words like internal review, procedural oversight, and temporary suspension filled the air, smoothing the sharp edges of what had nearly happened. The board convened again, this time without cameras, without smiles. Inside the building, people whispered. Some whispered in fear, others whispered in calculation. For Hawa Sadaya, the danger had not passed. It had simply changed shape. She sat on a bench across the street from the headquarters, watching employees stream in. Her name was not on any list anymore, neither staff nor visitor. She was a loose end, and loose ends were uncomfortable for people who preferred neat outcomes. Her phone buzzed. Jonah Dlamini, do not come inside today. They're watching entrances. Hawa typed back a simple reply. Understood. She pulled her scarf lower and waited. Inside the building, Kahinda Adeniyi stood at the window of his temporary office, looking down at the city that never stopped demanding pieces of him. He had reclaimed his authority publicly, but privately, he felt stripped bare. The mask had protected him. The truth now endangered him. You did the right thing, Dr. Samuel Mensah said quietly behind him. Kahinda nodded, but did not turn. Right things don't always keep people alive. Dr. Mensah hesitated. They're asking for you to make a statement. Kahinda exhaled slowly. Not yet. They want closure. I want clarity. Across the conference floor, Tunda Balogan packed his office with mechanical calm. His suspension letter lay folded neatly in his briefcase. He had already called his lawyer, his accountant, and one board ally, who still owed him a favor. What bothered him was not the fall. It was the girl. A cleaner, he muttered to himself. A nobody. Nobodies were supposed to disappear. He sent a message. Find her. At the same time, Mrs. Funmilayo Adenia sat in her car, outside a gated residence, fingers resting lightly on her phone. Her expression was composed, but her eyes burned. Kahinda had embarrassed her. Not publicly, not yet, but in the one place she cared about control. She scrolled through contacts and stopped at a familiar name. She did not call. She sent a single line. Loose ends are dangerous. Back on the street. Hawa felt the shift before she saw it. A black sedan slowed near the curb. Her body stiffened. She rose and walked calmly, deliberately into the flow of pedestrians. Years of navigating Lagos had taught her how to vanish without running. She crossed streets unpredictably, ducked into a small market, then exited through a side alley that smelled of fish and smoke. Her phone vibrated again. Aisha, 2 men came asking about you. Hawa's chest tightened. She typed back, don't tell anyone where I am. She needed shelter. Not safety, shelter was enough. She headed toward a small public library near Yaba, a place people forgot existed. Inside, the air was cool and quiet. She sat between shelves, pretending to read, and forced herself to breathe. She was not panicking. Panic wasted energy. She was planning. Upstairs in the building that still bore his name, Kahinda made a decision. Bring her here, he said to Jonah over the phone. Quietly, Jonah hesitated. That puts her in direct line of fire. She's already in it, Kahinda replied. At least here I can see who's aiming. By late afternoon, Jonah found Hawa as she stepped out of the library. Eyes alert. You shouldn't be alone, he said simply. Hawa nodded. I know. They entered through a service entrance. No cameras, no announcements. Inside, the building felt different, tighter, sharper. Hawa felt it in the way people avoided her eyes, in the way conversations died when she passed. They reached a small conference room with the blinds drawn. Kahinda stood when she entered. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Hawa bowed her head instinctively. Sir, Kahinda shook his head. Please don't. She looked up, surprised. I owe you more than respect, he said quietly. I owe you safety. Hawa swallowed. I didn't do it for you alone. I know, Kahinda replied. That's why it matters. He gestured for her to sit. Tell me everything, from the beginning. No pretending. So she did. She spoke of the recorder, the sedatives, the threats, the planted bracelet. She spoke of the holding room, the night duty, the lullaby. Her voice did not shake. She had crossed that bridge already. When she finished, silence filled the room. Kahinda closed his eyes briefly. They used your kindness as leverage. Yes, Hawa said. They thought it was weakness. Kahinda smiled grimly. So did I. Once, a knock sounded at the door. Jonah entered. We have a problem. Kahinda looked up. Which one? Legal says Tunde is threatening a countersuit. Defamation. Wrongful suspension. He's claiming the recordings were manipulated. Hawa stiffened. They weren't, I know, Jonah said, but claims don't need truth to be loud. Kahinda stood. Then we don't answer loud. We answer precise. He turned to Hawa. I need to protect you, but I also need you to decide something. Hawa met his gaze. What if this goes public? Kahinda said they will try to break your story, your past, your family, your credibility. It will be brutal. Hawa didn't hesitate. They already tried. Kehinde nodded slowly. If you stay, you do it on your terms. If you leave, I will make sure you're safe. Hawa thought of her mother, of Aisha, of the nights she cleaned floors that gleamed under other people's feet. I won't disappear, she said. Not this time. Kehinde's expression softened. Then neither will the truth. That evening, a new memo circulated. Independent investigation launched. External auditors engaged. Whistleblower protections enacted. It sounded clean, responsible, but behind the words, lines were being drawn. Funmilayo watched the announcement on her tablet, lips pressed thin. He thinks this ends it, she murmured. Vanessa, seated nearby, stared at her phone, unread messages piling up. He's ruining everything. Funmilayo looked at her coolly. No, you were never the plan. You were the distraction. Vanessa's face flushed. You promised. I promised opportunity, Funmilayo said. You mishandled it. Outside rain began to fall, sudden heavy cleansing nothing. Hawa stood by the window of the small room Jonah had arranged for her in the building, watching droplets race down the glass. She felt no triumph, only weight. This was not a fairy tale. Justice moved slowly, and it asked for endurance. Her phone buzzed one last time that night. Unknown number, we know where you are. Hawa's fingers tightened around the device. She did not reply. Instead, she walked back into the conference room where Kehinde sat alone, papers spread before him like a battlefield. They're not done, she said. Kehinde looked up, eyes steady. Neither are we. Outside, the rain kept falling on towers and shanties alike, indifferent to power, to fear, to the fragile line between foolishness and courage. And in that rain-soaked city, a poor maid and a powerful man prepared for the next move, knowing the real test had only just begun. The announcement of the engagement came quietly disguised as stability. By dawn, every major outlet carried the same carefully worded headline, Adeniyi Group CEO Kehinde. Adeniyi announces engagement to longtime family ally. No photos, no interviews, just a promise of order. Inside the building, the mood turned brittle. People who had avoided eye contact now smiled too eagerly. Assistants lingered near doors. Security doubled without explanation. The air hummed with a question no one dared ask out loud. Was this real or was it a trap? In the small conference room, Kehinde Adeniyi read the headline twice, then folded the tablet and set it down. They're forcing a timeline, he said. Jonah Dlamini nodded. An engagement changes narratives. It makes you look settled, controlled. Dr. Samuel Mensah adjusted his glasses. It also gives them cover to push medical evaluations again. Stress, pressure, concern for your well-being. Kehinde exhaled. They want one clean moment. One final move. Across the table, Hawa Sadia sat, quietly, hands clasped. She had learned to listen for what wasn't said. They're planning something during sleep, she said. They always do. The room fell silent. Jonah looked at her. You're sure? Yes. Hawa's voice was steady. They can't control him when he's awake. Kehinde closed his eyes briefly. The memory returned uninvited, waking with a pounding head, a metallic taste on his tongue. Nurses insisting nothing had changed. They'll try again, he said. Soon. The plan unfolded with restraint. No confrontations, no press conferences. The engagement would proceed, but on Kehinde's terms. He would perform stability while the investigation gathered strength behind the scenes. Dr. Mensah would oversee every medical input personally. Jonah would reroute security feeds. And Hawa, against every instinct, would stay close. Not as a cleaner, as a witness. By afternoon, the chosen partner arrived. Vanessa Adebayo stepped into the building like a woman walking into a memory she wanted to erase. The bruises had faded, The confidence returned layered over with resolve. She wore a pale blue dress that spoke of innocence she no longer needed to perform. When she saw Kahinda, she smiled softly. "I heard the news." "So did I," Kahinda replied evenly. She hesitated, then laughed. "Funny how life moves. Funny how it circles," he said. Vanessa's eyes flicked to Hawa just once, then away. "I assume she won't be involved." Kahinda met her gaze. "She will." The smile slipped. "Kahinda, everyone will be involved," he said. "Transparency." Vanessa swallowed. "You're not well." "Neither is lying," Kahinda replied. She left shortly after, phone already pressed to her ear. That evening, Hawa received a call from her mother's neighbor. "The doctor says the medicine has run out," the woman said, apologetically. "We need payment." Hawa's chest tightened. She closed her eyes, counting. The small stipend Jonah had arranged would barely cover transport, let alone medicine. Kahinda noticed her expression. "What is it?" my mother Hawa said quietly. "She's sick." Kahinda nodded once. "We'll handle it." "I don't want this isn't charity," he interrupted gently. "It's responsibility." Hawa said nothing more. Night came heavy and humid. The private floor dimmed. Security shifted. Dr. Mensah checked in twice, then remained nearby. The sedatives scheduled for Kahinda were reviewed, replaced, sealed. Everything appeared controlled. Too controlled. At 11:47 p.m., the power flickered, just once, then again. Emergency lights hummed to life. Hawa's heart skipped. "That's new!" Jonah's voice crackled through the comm. "Backup generators engaged. We're checking." Kahinda stood. "They're testing the edges." At 12:03 a.m., a nurse arrived with a tray unfamiliar. "I was sent," she said, avoiding eye contact. Hawa stepped forward. "By whom?" The nurse hesitated. "By administration." Kahinda smiled faintly. "Administration sleeps at night." Jonah moved in. "We'll take it." The nurse retreated quickly, too quickly. Hawa examined the tray. The tea looked ordinary. The pills did not. "This isn't what Dr. Mensah approved," she said. Kahinda nodded. "They're escalating." Dr. Mensah arrived moments later, breath tight. "They bypassed my orders." How Jonah demanded. "Through procurement," Mensah replied grimly. "Someone authorized an override." Kahinda looked at Hawa. "They're trying to rush me." The clock ticked louder than it should have. At 12:22 a.m., Kahinda's phone buzzed. "Fun Milayo." "You're pushing too far. Let the doctors help you." He didn't reply. At 12:31 a.m., another message arrived, this time anonymous. "Sleep is mercy." Hawa felt a chill crawl up her spine. "They're close," she said, "and desperate." Kahinda took a slow breath. "Then we let them show their hand." The decision was swift and dangerous. He would lie down. Not to sleep, but to bait. Jonah protested. Dr. Mensah argued. Hawa's hands trembled. "No," she said firmly. "Not alone." Kahinda met her eyes. "I won't be." They positioned themselves carefully. Monitors recalibrated. Security feeds locked. Hawa sat beside the bed. Not humming, not touching, just present. Minutes passed. Then Kahinda's breathing changed. "Stop," Dr. Mensah said sharply. "This isn't normal." Kahinda's face paled. His hands shook. Hawa stood. "It's coming from the air." They followed the line to a small patch near the bed, an adhesive patch on the wall, nearly invisible. Jonah ripped it free. Kahinda gasped, collapsing onto the mattress. Alarms sounded. Doctors rushed in. Dr. Mensah took over, barking orders. Oxygen, monitoring. The room filled with motion. In the chaos, Funmilayo arrived. She pushed past security face, arranged into concern. "What happened?" Dr. Mensah rounded on her. "You authorized an override." Funmilayo recoiled. "How dare you?" Jonah stepped forward. "We have logs." Vanessa appeared behind her, eyes wide. "Is he?" Kahindi's eyes fluttered open. He looked at Hawa. "Don't sleep," she whispered. He didn't. When the dust settled, the truth stood exposed, a concealed delivery system designed to administer sedatives through the air, untraceable, deniable. Except tonight. Except now. Funmilayo's composure cracked. "This is absurd." Kahinde's voice was hoarse but clear. "It's attempted murder." Silence fell. Sirens wailed in the distance. Hawa's knees weakened as the reality set in. She had stood inches from death and chosen to stay. As officers arrived and statements began, Kahinde reached for her hand. "Thank you," he said simply. Hawa squeezed back, tears finally falling. "You stayed awake." "So did you," he replied. Outside, dawn threatened the horizon, thin and pale. The engagement headline vanished by morning, replaced by another. Adeniyi Group launches criminal investigation into executive sabotage. But for Hawa, the headlines meant nothing. She had seen the truth, breathe struggle, and survive, and she knew the hardest part was still ahead. The hospital did not sleep that night. By dawn, the executive wing was sealed off with temporary barriers and unfamiliar uniforms. Investigators moved through the corridors with measured steps, photographing vents, collecting filters, sealing medication cabinets. The hum of authority replaced the hush of conspiracy. But the tension did not lift, it thickened. For Hawa Sadia, the morning came with a weight she could feel in her bones. She sat alone in a quiet waiting room, hands wrapped around a paper cup of tea. She had no intention of drinking. Her clothes smelled faintly of antiseptic and fear. She replayed the night again and again, the flicker of the lights, the patch on the wall. Kahinde's breath hitching as if sleep itself had turned hostile. She had stayed, and staying had almost killed him. Across the hall, Kahinde Adeniyi lay propped against pillows, awake, alert, exhausted, in a way that went beyond the body. Dr. Samuel Mensah stood at his bedside, reading results with a tight jaw. "You're stable," the doctor said quietly. "But this confirms intent, not negligence. Intent," Kahinde nodded. "They crossed the line." "They crossed it days ago," Mensah replied. "Tonight they left footprints." A knock sounded. Jonah Dlamini entered with a folder and a guarded expression. "Police want formal statements," he said. "From everyone." Kahinde's gaze drifted toward the waiting room. "From her too." Jonah hesitated. "Yes." Kahinde closed his eyes briefly. He had known this moment would come, the one where protection turned into exposure. "Bring her in," he said. Hawa entered quietly, posture respectful, eyes steady. She met Kahinde's gaze and inclined her head. "Sit," he said gently. She did, hands folded tight in her lap. "They'll ask you to speak," Kahinde said. "And when you do, they won't be kind." Hawa nodded. "I know. You can still walk away," he added. "I'll arrange transport, housing, work, your mother's care." Hawa's chest tightened at the mention of her mother. She pictured the small room back home, the neighbor's worried voice on the phone, the medicines that cost more than hope. "I can't," she said softly. Kahinde searched her face. "Why?" "Because if I leave now," Hawa replied, "they'll say I lied. And if they say I lied, the truth will be easier to bury." Silence settled between them. Kahinde exhaled slowly. "You're braver than I am." "No," Hawa said. "I'm just tired of being afraid." The interviews began before noon, in a small conference room repurposed for statements. Hawa sat across from two investigators and a stenographer. A uniformed officer stood by the door. The questions came calmly, precisely like a blade that cut without raising its voice. "When did you first suspect interference? Who instructed you to alter medication? Why did you not report this sooner?" Hawa answered carefully, truth by truth. She described the packets, the pressure, the recorder, the planted bracelet. She did not embellish. She did not accuse without proof. She spoke of fear without apology. At one point, an investigator leaned forward. Waiyu Hawa met his gaze. Because I was there, and because they thought I didn't matter. The room went quiet. When she finished, her throat burned, but her back felt straighter than it had in years. Outside, Mrs. Funmilayo Adeniyi arrived with a team of lawyers and a face composed for cameras. She issued a statement of concern, of cooperation, of deep disappointment. The words were impeccable. Vanessa did not appear. By mid-afternoon, a development reached Hawa like a blow. Her phone rang an unfamiliar number from the north. "Is this Hawa Sadia?" a man asked. "Yes. This is the clinic in Katsina. Your mother's condition has worsened. We need authorization for treatment." Hawa's hands shook. How much the figure felt unreal. "I don't have it," Hawa whispered. "We can wait," the man said kindly. But not long. The call ended. Hawa pressed the phone to her chest and breathed through the ache. This was the line conspiracies never crossed on paper, the collateral damage that never made it into reports. She stood and walked toward the window. The city sprawling beyond the glass, indifferent and immense. Kahinda found her there minutes later. "You don't have to say it," he said quietly. "I can hear it in the way you're standing." Hawa didn't turn. "If I ask for help now," she said, "they'll say everything I did was for money." Kahinda leaned against the wall beside her. "They'll say that anyway." She shook her head. "It matters to me." Kahinda was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Let me reframe it." She looked at him. "You didn't ask me," he continued. "I'm offering, as restitution, for the harm my world caused yours." Hawa swallowed. "They'll twist it. They already tried to kill me," Kahinda replied evenly. "I'm done worrying about how liars twist truth." He took out his phone and typed a message. Within minutes, Dr. Mensah joined them. "I'll call the clinic," Mensah said. "We'll arrange payment through an independent fund. No paper trail tied to you." Hawa's eyes filled. "Thank you," she whispered. "Stay," Kahinda said softly. "Not because I need you, because the truth does." The rest of the day unfolded in fragments. Security escorted Funmilayo to a separate exit after investigators requested her devices. Tunde's countersuit collapsed under the weight of procurement logs and timestamps. The board convened again, this time with external counsel present and voices stripped of arrogance. By evening, a new memo circulated, this one quieter, heavier. Mr. Kahinda Adeniyi, to resume full executive authority. Interim restrictions lifted. For the first time in weeks, Hawa allowed herself to sit. She sat in a small room with a narrow couch, staring at the wall, listening to her breath. She thought of the lullaby, how it had felt to hum something gentle in a place designed for harm. She wondered how kindness had survived long enough to matter. A knock came. Jonah stood at the door. "You should know," he said, "they're shifting strategy." Hawa nodded. "They always do. They'll go after credibility." Jonah continued. "Your background, your education, your family." Hawa straightened. "They won't find lies." "No," Jonah said. "But they'll frame truth as weakness." Hawa smiled faintly. "I'm used to that." Night fell again, but this time it felt different. Less predatory, more watchful. The building breathed as if exhaling after a held breath. Kahinda stood alone in his office, city lights reflecting in the glass. He thought of all the nights he had feared sleep, of the calculations that had kept him alive, of the price he had paid for caution. He thought of Hawa, how she had chosen to stay when leaving would have been safer. He picked up a pen and wrote a single line on a fresh page. "Power is not the absence of fear. It is what you protect while afraid." Down the hall, Hawa lay on the couch, eyes open, listening to the quiet. For the first time since the holding room, she felt something like relief. Not peace, not yet, but the knowledge that the hardest choice had already been made. She had stayed, and staying, she understood now, was its own kind of strength. The city exhaled as night settled in. But inside Adenia Group, the air tightened again. For 2 days there had been no explosions, no arrests on camera, no dramatic confessions. That quiet worried Hawa Sadia more than chaos ever had. She had learned that when powerful people stopped shouting, they were planning. She sat in the small room Jonah had arranged, reviewing timelines on a notepad Dr. Mensah had given her. Dates, names, times when lights flickered and medicines changed hands. The truth was no longer a single thread. It was a net, but nets could be cut. Her phone buzzed. Jonah, they're moving tonight. Hawa closed her eyes briefly, grounding herself. How do you know security rotations changed without notice? Procurement access spiked an hour ago. Hawa stood. Then it's the night. She walked briskly toward the executive wing, keeping to the service corridors. The building hummed with restrained activity elevators, running more often than usual, doors opening and closing with soft urgency. She recognized the rhythm now. It was the sound of people trying to look normal while preparing something dangerous. In the suite upstairs, Kahinda Adenia stared at the city lights, jaw set. He had slept the previous night. Not deeply, not easily, but enough to remind him what rest felt like when it wasn't coerced. Tonight would be different. They'll try to isolate you, Dr. Samuel Mensah said quietly, checking monitors. If they can't control the medicine, they'll control access. Kahinda nodded. Then we don't let 'em. Jonah entered, voice low. Funmilayo's legal team requested after-hours access to records. Kahinda smiled thinly. Denied. They didn't ask permission, Jonah added. They used an old authorization code. Kahinda's smile vanished. Cut it. Already done. Outside the suite, Hawa slowed her steps. 2 guards she didn't recognize stood near the corridor, broad, impassive eyes scanning. She felt the familiar prickle along her arms. She adjusted her scarf and walked past, neither hurrying nor hesitating. Years of invisibility paid dividends. Inside a maintenance alcove, she paused and listened. Voices echoed faintly through the vents. Men speaking in hushed tones, a woman's clipped authority. Funmilayo. Hawa's pulse quickened. She slipped her phone out and recorded only what she could hear. Footsteps, a door opening, a code entered. Evidence did not always need words. She moved on. At 11:18 p.m., the lights dimmed again, just once. Hawa's breath hitched. She reached the executive wing as Jonah's voice crackled through her earpiece. Power fluctuation. Isolated to this floor. Back up steady. Kahinda turned from the window. They're testing thresholds, or timing, Mensah replied. At 11:26 p.m., a cart rolled down the corridor, linen cleaning supplies, ordinary as dust. Hawa stepped out to intercept heart-pounding. Where are you headed? She asked the attendant, keeping her tone neutral. Sweet delivery, the man replied without meeting her eyes. Orders changed, Hawa said calmly. Hold here. The man hesitated. A beat too long. Jonah appeared at her shoulder. You heard her. The attendant backed away, cart squeaking as he retreated. Jonah watched him go, jaw tight. Good catch. Hawa didn't answer. She was already scanning the walls. There, near the vent above the doorframe, a slight discoloration. A panel that didn't quite align. She stepped closer, heart racing. It's not the air this time. Jonah followed her gaze. Wall delivery route, Hawa said. They're trying multiple vectors. Inside the suite, Kahinda felt it before the alarm sounded, a faint pressure behind his eyes. A taste that didn't belong. He stood abruptly. Stop, Mensah said. What is it? Smell, Kahinda replied. Sweet. Too sweet. Mensah's eyes sharpened. Seal the room. Jonah barked orders into the comm. Doors locked, vents closed. The suite became a capsule. Hawa's earpiece crackled. We've got a sealed environment, Jonah said. What do you see? The The wall, Hawa replied. Panel above the door. It's new. Copy. As Jonah dispatched a technician, footsteps pounded down the corridor. Funmilayo appeared flanked by a man in a suit. Hawa didn't recognize. Her face was composed, but her eyes were alight. "What is happening?" Funmilayo demanded. "This is outrageous!" Jonah stepped between her and the suite. "Restricted area. I have authority," Funmilayo snapped. "Not tonight." Kahinde's voice carried through the intercom, steady and clear. "Aunt." Funmilayo's smile flickered. "Kahinde, darling. They're overreacting," perhaps he replied. "But then I'm foolish." A muscle jumped in Funmilayo's jaw. The technician arrived and pried open the panel. Inside, taped neatly, was a slim device wired to a timed release chemical, slow plausible enough to be mistaken for a maintenance error. Mensa swore under his breath. They adapted. Sirens wailed in the distance. Funmilayo stepped back, hands raised slightly. "This is absurd! You're accusing family!" Kahinde's voice came again, hoarse but unwavering. "I'm accusing behavior." The man beside Funmilayo moved too fast. Jonah lunged, pinning him against the wall as a small vial clattered to the floor and rolled, spilling nothing but fear. Security swarmed. In the chaos, Hawa found herself pressed against the wall, breathing hard. She had been so close, too close to the edge. She felt the tremor in her hands and forced them still. Kahinde emerged from the suite, pale but upright, supported by Mensa. His eyes found Hawa immediately. "You saw it," he said. "Yes," she replied. "You stopped it." "We all did," she said. Funmilayo watched from a distance, face rigid as officers took statements and confiscated devices. When she met Hawa's gaze, there was no apology. There only calculation and a promise of future resistance. But the future had changed shape. By midnight, warrants were issued. Procurement logs were seized. The device was catalogued and bagged. For the first time, the story could not be smoothed into a memo. Hawa sat on a bench near the stairwell, hands shaking now that the danger had passed. Jonah handed her a bottle of water. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "I will be." Kahinde joined them, his posture weary but resolute. "You shouldn't have been here," he said softly to Hawa. She met his eyes. "Neither should you." He smiled faintly. "Fair." Sirens faded. The building settled into a watchful quiet. Later, alone in his office, Kahinde stared at the notepad where he had written about power and fear. He added another line beneath it. "Truth needs witnesses." Down the hall, Hawa sat with her back against the wall. Eyes closed, listening to her breathing, returned to normal. She thought of her mother's voice on the phone earlier that evening, stronger now, grateful, alive. She had chosen to stay again. And again staying had mattered. But she knew this was not the end. It was the last turn before the cliff or the bridge. The final test would not come in the dark, but in the light where everyone would be watching. She opened her eyes and stood. Whatever came next, she would meet it awake. Morning stripped the night of its disguises. By sunrise, the devices removed from the executive wing sat catalogued on steel tables, labeled with time signatures and chain of custody seals. The quiet efficiency of procedure replaced adrenaline, but the building remained taut, like a body bracing for impact. This was the day of light. In the lobby, cameras gathered again. Not invited, not welcomed, just present. When truth reached this stage, it no longer belonged to those who discovered it. Kahinde Adeniyi stood before the mirror in his office and practiced nothing. The foolish smile was gone. The careful pauses, the childlike deflections retired. He straightened his jacket and checked his reflection once more, not for vanity but for steadiness. "You don't owe them an explanation," Dr. Samuel Mensa said quietly. Kahinde nodded. "But I owe the truth a voice." Down the hall, Hawa Sadia waited in a small anteroom with Jonah Dlamini. She had slept barely an hour. The adrenaline had burned out, leaving a deep, bone-level fatigue. Yet when she stood, her posture was firm. "They'll try to turn you into a story," Jonah said, "not a person." Hawa gave a faint smile. "I've been a story all my life." He studied her. "You don't have to speak, I know," she replied, "but I will." The board convened at 9, the glass conference room filled with faces that had learned to look neutral under pressure. External counsel took seats at the edges. Investigators arranged files. A court reporter tested her recorder. Mrs. Funmilayo Adenia arrived last, flanked by lawyers. She moved with controlled dignity, chin-lifted eyes unreadable. If she felt fear, she hid it well. Kehinde entered without announcement. The room stilled. He took his seat at the head of the table, not reclaimed, but rightful. "We're here." He began, voice calm, to address attempted murder, corporate sabotage, and the misuse of authority. A ripple moved through the room, small, involuntary. Funmilayo's lawyer cleared his throat. "Allegations, evidence," Kehinde corrected, gesturing to the files. "And witnesses." The investigator stood. He outlined the findings in clean lines: procurement overrides, unauthorized access, concealed delivery systems, altered medication logs. Each item landed like a measured strike. Funmilayo's lawyer objected. Counsel countered. The rhythm was familiar to the room. What was not familiar was the next moment. Kehinde turned slightly. "I call Hawa Sadia." Hawa rose. She felt the eyes, first curious, dismissive, skeptical. She walked to the table with her head high and her hands steady. When she spoke to the room, not to power. "I was hired to clean," she said. "I learned to watch because watching kept me alive." She told them everything again, but this time without interruption. She described the packets, the pressure, the recorder, the planted bracelet, the nights when sleep itself had become a threat. She did not ask for sympathy. She did not raise her voice. When she finished, the room was silent. Funmilayo's lawyer stood. "Miss Sadia, you admit you altered medication without authorization." Hawa nodded. "I prevented harm. That's not your role." Hawa met his gaze. Neither was poisoning. A murmur swept the table. The lawyer pressed on. "You benefit now from the CEO's favor. Isn't it possible you fabricated?" Kehinde stood. "Enough," he said quietly. The word carried weight. He faced the room. "For months I pretended to be foolish because foolishness disarms greed. It draws it close enough to be seen." Funmilayo's eyes flashed. "You humiliated this family." "I protected it," Kehinde replied. "From you." Her composure cracked. "You're ungrateful." "I'm alive," he said evenly. "Because a woman you dismissed as nothing chose to stay awake." The investigator placed a final item on the table, a timeline aligning device activations with procurement overrides and security access. Names, times, decisions. The room exhaled. Funmilayo's lawyer whispered urgently. She shook him off. "This is a witch hunt," she said, voice sharp. "You're destroying legacy." Kehinde's gaze softened, not with mercy, but clarity. Legacy built on harm deserves to fall. The vote followed procedural, inevitable. Interim measures became permanent. Authorities were notified. Custodial steps initiated. When the meeting adjourned, the building felt different, lighter, as if something heavy had been removed. But outside, the day had teeth. Reporters surged. Microphones extended. Questions flew like stones. Kehinde stepped forward first. He spoke briefly, precisely, and refused spectacle. He named the investigation. He named accountability. He named protection for whistleblowers. Then he did something unexpected. He gestured to Hawa. "Hawa Sadia is here by choice," he said. "She owes no one an explanation, but she deserves respect." A reporter pushed forward. "Ms. Sadia, did you act for money?" Hawa met the lens. I acted because someone was in danger. Another voice cut in. Are you seeking compensation? I'm seeking sleep, she replied simply. For him. For me. The crowd stilled. Later, in a quiet corridor, Hawa leaned against the wall as the adrenaline finally drained. Her hands shook. She pressed them together until they stilled. Kehinda approached, careful not to crowd her. You were extraordinary. She shook her head. I was present. He nodded. That's rarer. By afternoon, arrests were announced. Fon Malayo departed in silence, flanked by counsel. Tunda's name appeared in official statements. Vanessa's role surfaced smaller, uglier, undeniable. The engagement announcement was formally withdrawn. In the late light, Kehinda returned to his office. He sat and closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to breathe. For the first time in years, his mind did not race. A knock sounded. Hawa stepped in hesitant. They said I should check on you. He smiled faintly. I'm fine. She studied him. You're still awake. Yes, he said, but not afraid. They stood in silence, the city glowing beyond the glass. What happens to me now? Hawa asked, not pleading, curious. Kehinda considered. That's your decision. If you want education, we'll fund it independently. If you want work, we'll find something that doesn't ask you to disappear. If you want time, you'll have it. Hawa nodded slowly. I want to learn. He smiled. Then we'll begin. As evening fell, Kehinda lay down, not in a hospital bed, not under watch, but on a couch in his office. He closed his eyes. No devices hummed, no vents whispered. Hawa sat nearby, not humming, not guarding, just present. Minutes passed. Then Kehinda slept. Deeply, peacefully. Outside, the city continued its endless argument with itself. Inside, something fragile and hard-won settled into place. The truth had been spoken. The light had done its work. The city learned slowly, the way cities always do. By the time the court filings became public, Lagos had already chosen its narrative. Some called Kehinda Adeniyi a genius who outsmarted his enemies. Others called him reckless for pretending weakness in a world that punished it. A few, very few, asked harder questions about power, about how easily systems bent when greed whispered in the right ears. For Hawa Sadia, the noise felt distant. She woke each morning in the small apartment Jonah had arranged temporarily, sunlight spilling across clean floors she no longer scrubbed for a living. The quiet still startled her. For years, survival had meant constant motion work, worry, prayer, exhaustion. Now the stillness forced her to feel everything she had postponed. Fear, relief, grief, pride. She missed her mother's voice most in the mornings until the call came 1 week later. Hawa, her mother said, stronger than she had sounded in months. The medicine is working. Hawa pressed a hand to her mouth, tears slipping free. Alhamdulillah. I heard something strange. Her mother continued gently. People say you are on the news. Hawa laughed softly through tears. Only because I refused to sleep when I should have. Her mother chuckled, then grew serious. You did well, my daughter, even when it was hard. After the call ended, Hawa sat on the edge of the bed and breathed in deeply. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that the danger was truly receding. At Adeniyi Group, the reckoning continued. Auditors moved through departments with quiet authority. Contracts were reviewed, access privileges rewritten. Entire layers of trusted intermediaries vanished from the building like smoke after rain. Kehinda watched it all with measured distance. Power returned to him in form, but he no longer wore it the same way. He arrived early. He listened longer. He asked fewer performative questions and more uncomfortable ones. And at night he slept. Not perfectly, not always, but without fear. One afternoon he invited Hawa to his office, not for strategy, not for testimony, but for conversation. She arrived carefully dressed posture, respectful but no longer shrinking. "Sit," Kahinda said, gesturing to the chair across from him. She did. "I've been thinking," he began, "about what pretending taught me." Hawa tilted her head, listening. "I thought acting foolish would protect me," he said. "And it did, for a while. But it also gave cruel people permission." Hawa nodded. "They thought weakness was an invitation." "Yes." He leaned back. "And kindness was leverage." Silence settled between them, comfortable now. "I'm enrolling in night classes," Hawa said suddenly. "Foundational courses, accounting first." Kahinda smiled. "Good choice. I want to understand systems," she continued, "so I don't get crushed by them again." He met her gaze. "If you ever want mentorship, real mentorship," she raised a hand, gently. "On one condition. Name it." "You don't rescue me," Hawa said. "You walk beside me." Kahinda considered, then nodded. Agreed. The trials moved faster than many expected. With evidence preserved, devices recovered, and testimonies aligned the case against Funmilayo Adeniyi, and her collaborators collapsed inward. No grand courtroom drama unfolded. No shouting, no cinematic confession. Just documents, timelines, and the dull finality of law. When Funmilayo was led into custody, cameras captured her only once, chin-high eyes, hard legacy unraveling quietly. Vanessa disappeared from headlines soon after her social circle, evaporating as quickly as it had formed. Greed, it seemed, made poor scaffolding. On the day the final injunctions were signed, Kahinda stood alone in the boardroom, long after everyone else had left. The table gleamed, the chairs stood empty. He thought of how close everything had come to ending in a hospital room beneath a vent no one noticed. He thought of Hawa's voice in the dark. Later that evening he joined her at a small cafe far from cameras and corridors. They did not sit across a polished table. They sat side by side sharing tea. "You know," Kahinda said quietly, "people keep asking me why I trusted you." Hawa smiled faintly. "What do you tell them? That you treated me like a person?" He replied. "Not a fortune, not a problem." She nodded. "People forget how powerful that is." Weeks turned into months. Hawa balanced classes with part-time work arranged through an independent foundation, clerical, modest, honest. She learned the language of numbers and policy, the way decisions hid behind forms and signatures. It was difficult. Some nights she fell asleep over textbooks, dreaming of corridors and alarms. But she kept going. Kahinda watched from a careful distance, offering guidance only when asked. He funded scholarships quietly. He restructured departments slowly. He refused to be rushed into public redemption. Healing, he learned, did not need applause. One evening, long after the last meeting ended, Kahinda found himself unable to sleep. Not from fear, but from memory. He sat on the couch in his office, city lights blinking beyond the glass, and waited. Minutes passed. He breathed. Sleep came. No humming, no guards, no devices, just rest. When he woke, he felt something unfamiliar and welcome. Peace. On the first anniversary of the investigation's close, Hawa stood in a modest hall receiving her first academic certificate. The applause was polite, the smiles sincere. She spotted Kahinda at the back, not in front, not announced. Afterward, outside under the evening sky, she approached him. "I passed," she said simply. "I knew you would," he replied. She hesitated. "I'm thinking of specializing in compliance." Kahinda laughed softly. "You'd terrify corrupt people." "That's the idea." They stood in companionable silence. "Thank you," Hawa said at last. "Not for money, not for protection, but for space." Kahinda nodded. "Thank you for staying awake." As they parted, Hawa walked into the city with a lighter step. She was still poor by many standards, still climbing, still vulnerable in a world that loved to forget people like her. But she was no longer invisible to herself. And that, she knew, changed everything. Some stories ended with wealth, others ended with love. This one ended with something quieter and harder to earn. Dignity. In a world that rewards noise and punishes stillness, this story reminds us that true strength is often quiet. Kehinde Adeniyi had power, wealth, and influence, yet none of it could protect him when greed crept close enough to wear familiar faces. Hawa Sadia had none of those things. She had no title, no connections, no safety net. What she had was presence, and presence, when paired with courage, can become a shield stronger than money. This is not a fairy tale where kindness magically fixes everything overnight. Hawa paid a price for staying awake when it would have been easier to look away. She was humiliated, accused, nearly destroyed. The world tried to teach her the same lesson. It teaches many poor and powerless people. Silence keeps you safe, but silence also keeps injustice alive. Hawa learned that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act while fear is still there. Kehinde learned something too. Pretending to be foolish protected him for a time, but it also invited cruelty. Power that hides too long becomes vulnerable to those who believe they own it. The moment he chose truth over strategy, he lost comfort but gained clarity. And clarity, once earned, makes healing possible. This story is about systems as much as people. It asks us to look closely at who gets believed, who gets ignored, and how easily kindness is mistaken for weakness. It reminds us that dignity does not come from position, and that justice often arrives not with thunder, but with endurance. Real change is slow, uncomfortable, and deeply human. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on it. Where have you stayed, silent, to survive? Where might staying awake change something, even in a small way? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective matters more than you think. And if you believe in stories that center humanity,